Okay, so what we're going to learn how to do today is how to resolve forces for a concurrent coplanar system. So whenever we have a system that looks like this, you can see that I have three forces that are all going back to the same point. They are a concurrent coplanar system. But anytime I have angular forces, it's much easier for me to set up equilibrium equations if I resolve these forces. And when I say resolve, I mean just basically taking a triangle and taking the angular side and then basically relating that to the horizontal and the vertical side. So we have two angular forces here, the one that's T1 on this side and this one is T2. So we're going to go ahead and do both. We're going to do one at a time. So we're going to start off with T1. I go to this next slide. I went ahead and copied it over for you. And you'll see that right now I have T1 drawn here as the hypotenuse, and I've got T1x and T1y. I need to figure out what these are. And I'm given this angle between T1 and T1x, which is 32 degrees. So I need to use some trigonometric functions here. Now, since this 32 is here, that's going to determine which ones I need to use. When I resolve these forces, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just type in T1x equals some value. We're going to determine that in a minute. And I'm going to say T1y is going to equal some value, which we're going to determine in a minute. Okay. Now T1x and T1y, what we're going to do is we're going to have to multiply the hypotenuse as the first term. That's basically because we're going to take a fraction of the hypotenuse for the x side and for the y side. So T1x, we're going to go ahead and put T1 here, okay? And then we're going to do the same thing down here, T1, okay? Now the next thing we need to do is we need to figure out what trigonometric function we need to use. Now since this 32, we're going to do x first. Since this 32 is adjacent to the x side, we're going to use cosine because cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So we're going to go ahead and type in cosine and we'll put 32, okay, which means for this y, since the y is opposite of the angle that we care about, we're going to go ahead and use sine 32. Okay, now I can go ahead with my calculator and simplify these particular equations. So what I have here is I'm going to make sure I turn my calculator on. I need to make sure that my calculator is in degrees because I'm using degrees here. So I'll type in cosine 32 and I get a value of 0.848. I'm going to go ahead and just round it to 2 decimal places. So for this first one, it'll be 0.85 and then I'll just say T1. So that's my Tx value. So whenever I make my equation for whenever T1x appears, I will use this value for that number or for that particular variable. Now T1y, I'm going to go ahead and use my calculator and type in sine 32, and I get a value of 0.5299. So we are going to round that to 0.53. And then T1, we'll put that in there. So now we've finished simplifying or resolving these forces for that first triangle. Okay, we're going to look at the second triangle now, which I have a picture of that here. So what we're going to do here now is we're going to look at this 46. So I'm going to do something very similar to what I did before. I'm going to go ahead and type in T2x equals and then T2y equals, just to go ahead and set up what I want to do. Now, just like I did before, the very first term, well, the T2x and the T2y are going to be a fraction of the hypotenuse. So I need to put the hypotenuse in here as the first term. So that'll be T2 and T2. Now I need to use my angles and my trig functions again. This 46 is adjacent to the T2x. So I'll go ahead and type in cosine 46 in this case. And if I take a look at the y, you can see that it's opposite of the 46. So I'll go ahead and type in sine of 46 here. Now when I do the math on my calculator, if I type in cosine 46, I'll end up with 0.6946. I'm going to go ahead and round that to 3 decimal places since it's sitting right in the middle. So I'm going to say 0.695, and then I'll say T2. And for this one, sine 46, I'll get a number, I get 0.719. So we're going to round that to 2 decimal places, 0.72 T2. So now we have all the forces resolved in this triangle. We have the T1x, T1y, T2x, and T2y. So that will allow us with these numbers here and here to go ahead and create our equilibrium equations.